the coach's voice cut across the entire rink. "Go back to figure skating, sweetheart. Hockey's not for pretty little girls who cry when they fall." Laughter rippled through the benches. 32 players. All of them boys. All of them watching. Imogen Farrell stood at center ice, helmet in her hands, jaw set, eyes dry. She was 19 years old. She had driven 4 hours from Thunder Bay to try out for the Lakewood Falcons Junior Development Program. She had not eaten since 6 that morning, because she spent her last $20 on the bus fare back, just in case. She did not cry. She put her helmet back on and skated to the gate. Coach Bernard Croft watched her go with the particular satisfaction of a man who had never once been told no. He had coached junior hockey in Northern Ontario for 23 years. He had sent 11 players to the OHL. He had a plaque on his wall and a habit of deciding who belonged before the first whistle ever blew. He had decided about Imogen in the first 30 seconds. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, because men like Bernard rarely bother to look, was that the girl skating off his ice had already been clocked at the third fastest slap shot in her age bracket at the provincial combine, that she had spent the last 4 winters training on a frozen pond behind her grandmother's house in Shania. Because her family couldn't afford rink time, that her younger brother, Callum, had type 1 diabetes, and that every tournament fee, every stick, every pair of skates Imogen had worn in the last 6 years had been bought with money she earned, cleaning offices on Fridays nights while her classmates went to parties. She wasn't there to impress Bernard Croft. She was there because her brother believed she could do this, and she had promised him she would try. Imogen's mother, Paulette Farrell, had raised 2 kids alone in a rental house on the edge of a town that had more Canadian Tire stores than traffic lights. Paulette worked dispatch for a trucking company, double shifts when she could get them, and she had a coffee mug on her kitchen counter that said "one day, at a time." Not because she was an optimist, but because thinking further ahead than that had a way of making the math feel impossible. Callum was 12. He was slight and funny and obsessed with hockey statistics in the way only a kid who can't always play can be. He kept a notebook. Shooting percentages, save ratios. He had Imogen's career stats in there too, written in pencil, updated after every game, every combine, every tryout. When Imogen came home from Lakewood without a spot on the roster, Callum didn't ask what happened. He just looked at her face in the doorway and said, "Next time." She sat down on the kitchen floor, back against the cupboard, still wearing her jacket. Paulette set a cup of tea beside her without saying anything. That was the thing about her mother. She never made you talk about it before you were ready. "He didn't even watch me skate a full shift," Imogen said finally. "He saw me come through the gate and he'd already made up his mind." Paulette sat down on the floor next to her. 2 women on a linoleum floor in a house that was drafty in October and freezing by January, sharing a mug of tea between them because they only had the one. "Then he's an idiot," Paulette said. "And idiots don't get to decide what's true." That was the whole conversation. But Imogen thought about it for months. She didn't quit. That needs to be said plainly, because the easy version of this story would have Imogen crumble and then rebuild dramatically, and that's not what happened. What happened was smaller and harder and more ordinary than that. She kept training. She got up before school and ran the road behind the house. 5 kilometers, 6, 7, because she couldn't always get ice time, but she could always get road. She watched game film on her laptop with the sound off so she wouldn't wake Callum. She called her uncle, Thomas Farrell, who had played senior rec hockey until his knee gave out and still knew more about skating mechanics than most people she'd ever met, and she asked him to drill her on her edges every weekend he could manage the drive. Thomas came. Every second weekend, sometimes more. He'd pull up in his truck at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and a bag of pucks, and they'd find whatever patch of usable ice was available. A public rink, a church parking lot that froze well, once the back lot of a grocery store on a February morning, so cold the air stung. And he would put her through the kind of detail work that most junior coaches never bother with because it's too slow and too boring. And the results don't show up on a scoreboard for months. "Shoulder," he'd say, watching her crossovers. "You're telegraphing left every time. They'll read you." She'd do it again and again, until the habit dissolved and something cleaner took its place. She entered the Northern Ontario Women's Hockey Association League that fall. First game, she scored twice and set up 3 more. By December, she was leading the league in points. By February, the regional sports page had run a short item about her. 4 paragraphs buried in the athletics section, below a story about a curling rink renovation. But still, Bernard Croft almost certainly did not read it. The call came in March of the following year, and it came not from Lakewood, but from a development coordinator named Renee Bissonnette with Hockey Canada's Winson's national program. She had seen footage from the NOHA playoffs. She was reaching out to a handful of players to participate in an identification camp in Ottawa. Imogen read the email 3 times, sitting in the parking lot of the office building, where she worked Friday nights. She had mopped 3 floors and cleaned 11 washrooms before she checked her phone. Her back hurt. Her hands smelled like the industrial citrus cleaner they used on the bathroom tiles. She typed back a 1-sentence reply, neat and direct. "Thank you for reaching out. I'd be honored to attend." She called Callum from the car. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake, which at 11:30 on a Friday meant he'd been worried about something. His numbers had been unpredictable that month, running high in the evenings, and Paulette had been on the phone with the endocrinologist twice. "Cal," she said, "I got something." He went quiet for a second. Then, "How big?" "Ottawa. Hockey Canada." The sound he made, she still can't describe it properly. It was like something releasing, like a held breath that had been held for years. Ottawa was cold in April, in the particular way that Ottawa is cold in April, which is to say it felt personally offensive after you'd convinced yourself that winter was done. The Hockey Canada facility was nothing like the rinks Imogen had trained in. The ice was perfect, the equipment room smelled like new rubber and money. There were 42 players there from across the country, from Ontario and Quebec and BC, and 2 girls from Nunavut who had driven through 2 connecting flights and a 4-hour layover to get there, which put Imogen's 4-hour bus ride in a certain perspective. The camp director was a woman named Coach Sylvie Ouellette, who had played professionally in Europe for 8 years, and had a manner that Imogen initially read as cold, but gradually understood, was simply precise. Sylvie said what she meant. She didn't compliment things that didn't deserve compliments. She watched with the particular focus of someone who isn't deciding whether to like you. She's deciding what you're actually made of. On the second day, during a competitive scrimmage, Imogen took a puck off the half wall, spun inside the blue line, and fired a shot that went in off the post so fast that the goalkeeper didn't move. Sylvie, watching from the boards, wrote something down. Imogen didn't see it. She was already back on the forecheck. That evening, in the common room at the team hotel, she called her mother. Paulette was on a break from her overnight shift, whispering so she wouldn't disturb the driver she was dispatching for. "How's the ice?" Paulette asked. "Perfect," Imogen said. "Like skating on glass." "Good." A pause. "You eating enough?" "To eat when you're focused." "I ate. What did you have?" "Mom." A longer pause. Then Paulette laughed, soft and tired, and said, "Okay, I'll stop." She didn't stop for another 4 minutes, which was fine. Imogen didn't mind. The selection camp lasted 5 days. On the last afternoon, Sylvie gathered the players in the meeting room and delivered individual feedback. Not in front of the group, but one at a time, in a small office off the main corridor. Players came out looking variously relieved or gutted. One girl from Quebec had clearly been crying, though she'd straightened herself up before rejoining the group. Another player, a defender from Kelowna who Imogen had gone up against in a drill and found genuinely terrifying, came out smiling in a way she was trying to suppress. Imogen went in last. Sylvie was sitting across a table with a notepad open. She looked up when Imogen sat down. "You've been training without a consistent coaching structure," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mostly yes," Imogen said. "It shows in some things. Your edge work is excellent, unusually so for someone without structured programming. Your read of play is also strong. But your positioning in the defensive zone has habits in it that someone should have corrected a long time ago." Imogen nodded. "We can correct them," Sylvie said. That was the moment. Those 4 words, not good job or impressive performance or any of the things Imogen had sometimes let herself imagine hearing. Just, "We can correct them." As in we, as in you're in. She thanked Sylvie and walked out of the office and down the corridor, where she sat on the second step and put her face in her hands, and allowed herself, for exactly 90 seconds, to feel everything she had been holding back for the past 2.5 years. Then she stood up, walked back to the common room, and texted Callum a single word, "Yes." His reply came in 4 seconds. It was just a string of numbers, her shooting percentage from the Northern Ontario season, the stat he'd been tracking, the one he'd been updating in his notebook all year, and underneath it, in capital letters, Canoe. She made the National Women's Program Development roster that spring. That June, she was named to the squad for the World Junior Women's Championship in Halifax. The announcement went up on Hockey Canada's website on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, her name had been shared enough times on social media that a journalist from the Thunder Bay Chronicle-Journal called Paulette at work asking for a comment. Paulette, dispatching a flatbed truck to Sudbury at the time, told the journalist she'd have to call back. She called back 3 hours later, on her break, sitting in her car in the parking lot. The journalist asked how she felt about her daughter representing Canada at the World Championship. "How do I feel?" Paulette repeated, a long pause. "I feel like she earned every bit of it. That's how I feel." It ran in the paper the next day. Imogen's uncle Thomas cut it out and laminated it, which was something he claimed he did not do, and then gave it to Callum, who kept it folded in the back of his stats notebook. Halifax in August. The Scotiabank Centre, which holds nearly 11,000 people, and on the night of the gold medal game, it was very close to full. Canada against the United States, which is always the game, the one that carries a particular weight in the Canadian hockey imagination. Not just national pride, but something older and more complicated and harder to name. Imogen had been in the tournament for 10 days. She had scored 4 goals and 7 assists in the preliminary rounds. She had played with a speed and directness that the commentators had started to describe in specific ways. Relentless, precise, reads the play a step ahead. She had also, in the semifinal against Finland, blocked a shot with her shin that left a bruise the size of a hardcover book. She had not mentioned it to anyone on the medical staff because she was not going to miss this game. Thomas had driven from Thunder Bay to Halifax. 22 hours. He arrived the night before the final, walking into the hotel lobby, looking like a man who had been in a car for 22 hours, and Imogen, seeing him through the lobby window before he even reached the door, had to turn away for a moment to collect herself. Paulette had taken 2 days off, unpaid, because she couldn't afford the loss, but she took them anyway. And driven Callum, who was wearing his Hockey Canada replica jersey, with Farrell printed across the back, in letters he had specifically requested, be larger than the default size. But his blood sugar had been stable all week, which felt like its own kind of grace. The game was hard and tight in the way that Canada-US is always hard and tight. First period, no score. Second period, the U.S. took a lead on a power play goal that the Canadian bench challenged and lost. 11,000 people expressed their opinion of this call, with some volume. Imogen was on the ice for the tying goal midway through the third. She didn't score it, but she made the play that made the goal possible. A backhand pass through 2 defenders that found the tape of her linmate's sticks so cleanly it looked choreographed. The building came up. Overtime, 4-on-4, wider ice, the kind of hockey that runs on controlled chaos and the ability to hold your nerve while everything around you is accelerating. Imogen took the puck behind her own net. Let the forecheck come to her. Waited. 1 beat, 2 beats, longer than felt comfortable. And then she moved. Up the right wing. Cut inside the American defender, who had been playing her to the outside all night. And let a shot go from the top of the circle. The noise from 11,000 people hit her before she even fully processed what had happened. She knew, though, the way the puck felt leaving her stick, the way the ice opened up ahead of her, and there was nothing in it but space and the red light coming on. She knew. The celebration was the kind of thing that's hard to describe, without it sounding smaller than it was. Her linmates crashing into her, the bench emptying, the sound of the building, doing something that seemed less like cheering and more like weather. Somewhere in that crowd, Callum was standing on his seat, screaming something she'd never be able to hear. And Paulette was gripping Thomas's arm hard enough to leave marks, and Thomas was making no effort whatsoever to keep his composure. Imogen found Sylvie in the chaos after the medal ceremony. The coach was standing at the edge of the ice, watching the players with an expression that Imogen now knew how to read. Not cold, never cold. Just present, paying attention. "Thank you," Imogen said. Sylvie looked at her. For what? For seeing it. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It wasn't hard to see." Weeks later, back in Thunder Bay, Imogen drove past the Lakewood Falcons rink on her way to visit her uncle. It was a Tuesday evening. Tryouts were on. She could see the lights through the windows, the silhouettes of boys moving on the ice. She didn't stop. She had somewhere to be. But she thought about Bernard Croft, the way you think about a door you walked through, that no longer leads anywhere. Important. She thought about his voice across that ice. "Go back to figure skating, sweetheart." And she thought about what she'd known even in that moment, standing there, helmet in her hands. She'd known it wasn't true. That was the thing nobody tells you about contempt. Sometimes, it's clearest to the person it's aimed at, because they're the only one in the room who knows the actual facts. She knew what she was. She had always, his known. Bernard Croft just hadn't been paying attention. He still wasn't, and honestly, that was fine. Some people never look up. Some people sit in the same building for 20 years, deciding who doesn't belong, and they miss everything that matters. They miss the girl driving 4 hours on a bus with $20 in her pocket. They miss the kid in the Thunder Bay house, keeping stats in a notebook. They miss the mother on the linoleum floor sharing a single cup of tea and meaning it when she says, "Idiots don't get to decide what's true." The ice was full of boys in the Lakewood rink. Some of them would go on to something. Some of them would fall out of hockey by 19 and find their life elsewhere. And that would be fine too. But none of them were the story tonight. Tonight the story was a gold medal sitting on Callum's desk, next to his stats notebook, in a house in Shunaya where the windows were drafty, and the tea was always shared, and nobody had ever once told Imogen Farrell that she didn't belong on the ice. They just didn't need to. She already knew she did.